The biting city wind, laced with the scent of damp concrete and exhaust fumes, tore at Riley Morgan's threadbare coat. Her stomach, a hollow drum, echoed the emptiness in her wallet. A meager $4.16. Another interview, another desperate prayer. She clutched her resume, a crumpled shield against the drizzle that had softened the ink at its edges. It was her last copy, a testament to countless rejections, each one a fresh bruise on a spirit already weary. She'd skipped breakfast again, the bus fare a higher priority than food. But even that was now in question. Just as the crosswalk signal blinked green, her gaze snagged on a figure sprawled on the wet pavement outside a corner delight. A man, middle-aged, his clothes rumpled and soaked, winced, clutching his side. Beside him, a brown paper bag had burst, scattering a ruined sandwich and a crushed drink into the grimy puddles. People streamed past, their eyes fixed forward, a collective shrug of indifference. But Riley didn't hesitate. The memory of her own falls, literal and metaphorical, was too fresh. She jogged over, kneeling beside him, the cold seeping into her jeans. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice a soft counterpoint to the city's roar. He looked up, startled, rain darkening his hair. His eyes, though tired, held a surprising depth. I think so. Just bruised my pride, mostly." He tried to stand, his movements stiff. Riley offered a steadying hand, her grip surprisingly firm. As he rose, he glanced at the soggy wreckage of his lunch, a self-deprecating chuckle escaping him. "Well, there goes my lunch." Without a word, Riley turned and walked into the deli. The warmth inside was a stark contrast to the biting wind, the aroma of coffee and grilled cheese a cruel taunt to her empty stomach. She knew what she was doing. It was a reflex, a deeply ingrained response to seeing someone else at their lowest. Minutes later she emerged, holding a fresh turkey sandwich, still warm in its wax paper, and a bottle of water. She extended them to him. He blinked, a flicker of disbelief in his eyes. "Miss, no, I can't accept that." "You don't need to." Riley managed a tired but genuine smile. "You look like you need it more than I do." He took the offerings hesitantly, his fingers brushing hers. "Why would you do that?" he asked, his voice quiet, curious. "You don't even know me." Riley's smile softened, a shadow passing over her features. "I've been the one lying on the ground," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "I know how it feels." A long pause stretched between them, thick with unspoken understanding. He nodded slowly, clearly moved. "Thank you," he said, his voice husky. "Truly." She nodded once, a quick, dismissive gesture, and shoved her hands into her coat pockets. "Good luck," she mumbled, turning to go. "What's your name?" he called after her. She hesitated, then glanced over her shoulder, her damp blonde hair sticking to her cheek. "Riley Dotchget." "Thank you, Riley," he said again, but she was already merging into the indifferent crowd, her figure shrinking with each determined step. She didn't look back. If she had, she might have seen him watching her, a strange, unreadable expression in his eyes, something between wonder and a profound, quiet regret. Riley's pace slowed as she rounded the next corner, stepping under the blessed dryness of an awning. She pulled out her wallet again. 4 coins. That was all. The rumble in her stomach returned, a fierce, gnawing ache. Her coat clung to her, heavy with the drizzle. She shook her head, a deep exhale fogging in the cool air, and looked up at the looming glass edifice before her. Vale Corp. Her interview. The building soared into the bruised sky like a monument to ambition, sleek, intimidating, its polished surfaces reflecting the city in distorted silvered glinsil. Her own reflection stared back at her in the glass door, wet hair, tired eyes, and a paper-thin folder clutched to her chest like a fragile shield. She took a deep, fortifying breath. Then, she pushed the door open and walked in. The lobby was a cathedral of corporate power. Warm, bright, hushed. Marble floors gleamed, reflecting the soft glow of recessed lights. The air smelled of expensive coffee and a faint, sharp citrus. People in tailored suits moved with an effortless confidence that made Riley feel like a ghost. She approached the front desk, her worn boots making barely a sound on the plush carpet. "Hi," she said, her voice a little reedy. "I'm here for a 1:00 p.m. interview. Riley Morgan. I. The receptionist, a woman with perfectly coiffed hair and an unblemished smile, gave a brief nod, scanned a list on her tablet, and then her smile widened, a touch more genuine now. "Yes, Messi. Morgan. You're on the list." Elevator to the 22nd floor. Riley murmured a thank you, her heart thrumming with a nervous, fragile hope, and turned towards the bank of elevators. As the polished doors slid shut behind her, she caught her reflection again in the burnished metal. No lunch. No money. And she knew, no clean record. But she still had her name, and for now, that would have to be enough. The elevator chimed softly, a gentle, almost welcoming sound, as Riley stepped onto the 22nd floor of Vale Corp. The carpet beneath her worn boots felt impossibly plush, too clean, as if each step she took left behind an invisible shadow of doubt. The receptionist gestured towards a glass-walled waiting area, where a handful of other applicants sat. They were sleek, confident, impeccably dressed, their faces radiating an easy assurance. Riley smoothed her damp hair, tucking stray strands behind her ears, and hugged her folder to her chest, as if its flimsy cardboard could somehow protect her from the weight of judgment. Across the expansive floor, behind a tinted glass wall, a figure stood, tablet in hand, watching. It was Ethan Vale, the new CEO of Vale Corp. He wore a tailored charcoal jacket now, a crisp white shirt, no longer the weathered flannel and scuffed boots from earlier that day. But his eyes hadn't changed. They were still observant, still quietly searching, and they found her. The same woman who had handed him her last sandwich, her eyes heavy with exhaustion, but her voice still steady with kindness. She had walked away without asking for anything, not even his name. He hadn't expected to see her again, certainly not here. Not among the polished, ambitious faces vying for a coveted position at his company. For a long moment, he said nothing, simply watched. Then, slowly, he turned away. He would listen first, learn who she was when she thought no one was watching. Riley found a vacant chair in the waiting area, settling into it as inconspicuously as possible. Her fingers toyed with the edge of her resume, the paper soft and worn from the rain and her anxious grip. She glanced at the other candidates, each scrolling confidently on their phones, their portfolios gleaming, their laughter light and effortless. She felt like a smudge on clean glass, an imperfection in a carefully curated display. Riley Morgan. Died. The voice was crisp, professional. Riley stood quickly, her heart giving a nervous jump. She followed a woman in a dark green suit into a medium-sized conference room. 3 people waited. Monica from HR, Davis from the tech team, and Barrett, a senior legal counsel. Each wore a practiced smile, a corporate mask of cordiality. The first 10 minutes of the interview went smoothly. They asked about her work ethic, her coding certifications, her adaptability. Riley answered carefully, honestly, her words measured, her voice clear despite the dryness in her throat. She could feel her confidence rising, a fragile balloon trying to reach the open air, buoyed by the genuine interest in her technical skills. Then came the moment she had learned to dread, the inevitable turning point in every interview. Barrett, the legal counsel, leaned forward slightly, his hands folded on the table. "And Morgan," he began, his tone subtly shifting, "we've reviewed your resume, but we also ran a background check." Riley's heartbeat slowed, not stopped, just braced. She nodded, her gaze steady. "Yes, I expected that." The air in the room shifted, growing perceptibly colder. "It shows a conviction," Barrett continued, his voice devoid of emotion. "Financial fraud." 2 years, sir." "Do you care to elaborate?" Riley looked them in the eyes. No anger, no defensiveness, just the stark, unvarnished truth. "I was 24. I worked as a junior accountant for a startup. I trusted the wrong person, my boyfriend at the time. He used my credentials to authorize transfers. When the investigation came, he disappeared. I had no proof to defend myself. No money for a better lawyer. And I had signed documents I didn't understand. Silence and... She continued, her voice quieter now, the words heavy with a past she carried like a stone. I went to prison. 2 years. My mother died while I was there. I missed the funeral. And when I got out, I decided I wouldn't let that be the end of my story. Go on. One of the panelists cleared his throat. Another looked at her resume again, no longer with interest but with calculation, weighing her against an invisible scale of risk. I've worked part-time jobs since, Riley added, her voice gaining a renewed strength, a quiet defiance. No one wanted to take a chance. But I didn't stop learning. I've earned 3 new certifications. I've taught coding to kids at a community center. I've stayed out of trouble. I've done the work. Naina. The air felt thick now, heavy with unspoken judgment. No one spoke. Behind the glass wall, Ethan watched. Every word, every pause, every flicker of emotion on her face. This wasn't just a story. It was a confession wrapped in courage. And she had told it not to gain sympathy, but because she refused to lie. Riley left the room 10 minutes later, her shoulders squared, her chin held high. They had thanked her, said they'd be in touch. The words meant nothing. She knew the tone, the polite dismissal that sealed her fate. Outside the building, she stood under the awning again. The rain had stopped. The clouds were beginning to break, revealing patches of pale blue sky. She stared at the endless stream of traffic, wondering if she had enough change for the bus, or if she'd be walking home again, the city stretching before her like an insurmountable obstacle. Behind her, high above, from the executive floor, Ethan Vale stood with his arms crossed, watching her through the tall windows. He remembered her voice, soft yet resolute. You've been the one lying on the ground. I know how it feels. That voice hadn't begged. It hadn't blamed. It had simply helped. Ethan's jaw tightened. He pressed a button on the intercom and said just 2 words, his voice cutting through the hushed silence of the executive suite. The conference room felt colder the second time Riley sat inside it. Maybe it was the air conditioning, cranked up too high. Maybe it was the subtle shift in tone from the interviewers. She sat straight, her hands folded calmly on the polished table, even though she could feel her knuckles tightening every time someone glanced at the final page of her file. 3 interviewers remained. Monica from HR, Davis from the tech team, and Barrett, the senior legal counsel. They had started off cordial, friendly even. They complimented her code samples, her community work, her answers about team collaboration and problem solving. I like how you mapped out the data reconciliation for that non-profit project, Davis had said, a rare spark of genuine interest in his eyes. Clean logic, efficient ... Riley had nodded, grateful for the fleeting moment of professional validation. But now all eyes had shifted, and so had the energy. Barrett spoke first, his voice precise, devoid of warmth. MS Cole? Morgan, we've reviewed your credentials, and I won't deny they're strong, but there's another matter. Riley nodded, already knowing where this was headed. He tapped the folder, his finger resting pointedly on the last page. Your conviction. A pause, heavy and expectant. Riley inhaled slowly, then looked him directly in the eye. Yes. I was convicted of financial fraud 3 years ago. I served 2 years. No one moved. Davis flipped his pen between his fingers, a nervous habit. Riley continued, her voice not wavering. I didn't do what they said I did. I was naive. I trusted someone I shouldn't have, but the system didn't care about that. I signed things I didn't understand. And when everything collapsed, he disappeared. I stayed, and I paid. Dion. Barrett leaned back, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips. But you were released early for good behavior, Miss Morgan ... You're done. I spend every day learning, teaching, Riley countered, her voice gaining a quiet strength. I left prison with a coding certification and a job waiting tables. I've been clean since. And more than that, I've been present for my work, for the kids I mentored, for myself. Another pause, stretched thin. I'm not here to erase my past, she added more softly now, her gaze sweeping over their faces. I'm here to prove it didn't destroy me. Monica looked down, her fingers playing with the edge of the folder, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Davis looked uncertain, his pen still flipping. Barrett crossed his arms, his expression unyielding. We're a high-profile firm, Miss Morgan. We deal with sensitive data, large clients. It's not just about what you've done. It's about perception, trust. Unknowingly. I understand, Riley said, her voice steady. I just ask that you judge me by what I built after the fall, not the moment I fell. The silence returned, stretching longer this time, a thick, suffocating blanket. Finally, Monica cleared her throat, a polite, almost apologetic sound. Thank you, Riley. We appreciate your transparency and your time. That was the line, the polite dismissal. She stood, nodded once, and collected her things, her worn resume now even more creased. Will I be hearing from you? She asked gently, a final, fragile attempt. Barrett answered first, his voice clipped. We'll let you know after we've reviewed all final candidates. Davis didn't meet her eyes. Monica gave a tight, practiced smile. Thank you again. Riley stepped out of the room, her back straight, but her shoulders slightly lower than when she walked in. She walked through the gleaming lobby of Vale Corp, her reflection passing over glass and chrome, a faint, almost transparent ghost. Her stomach growled again, a familiar ache, but she ignored it. Outside, the drizzle had started again, light, persistent, a mournful whisper against the pavement. She didn't open her umbrella. She let the cool water hit her skin as she walked down the steps, the vast, indifferent city swallowing her whole once more. Somewhere behind her, on a higher floor, Ethan Vale had been watching. He didn't say a word, but his jaw tightened and his decision had already started to form. Ethan sat alone in his office. The city's skyline spread out behind him like a painting of unreachable lights. But his attention stayed on the manila folder in front of him, the one labeled Riley Morgan. He had watched the interview footage twice. The way she held her ground, the way her voice didn't beg but explain, the way she didn't flinch, even when silence was used as a weapon. He tapped a finger lightly on her resume. Then with a sharp breath, he picked up the phone and dialed. Legal, answered a crisp voice. This is Ethan Vale, he said, his voice calm, but with an underlying steel. I need a full background verification on Riley Morgan. Not just the conviction. I want the court transcripts, public defender notes, and any open civil suits tied to the case. Dig deep. It did not. There was a pause on the other end, a beat of surprise. Yes, sir. Right away. Yeah, why? He hung up and stared again at her photo clipped to the top of the file. Blonde hair, a calm smile that almost didn't fit the story beneath it. A few hours later, the comprehensive report arrived. Ethan read every page, every line, and what he found was worse than he expected. The boyfriend, Shane Ramsey, had been under investigation for 3 other financial crimes, all dropped due to lack of evidence. Riley's name had been the only one attached to signed authorizations, the sole scapegoat. Her legal defense had been almost non-existent, a perfunctory gesture by an overworked public defender. There had been no follow-up investigation after her release, no real attempt to prove her innocence until now. Ethan closed the folder, exhaled slowly, a long troubled sigh, and picked up his cell. The voice that answered was older but strong, a bedrock of wisdom. Ethan, everything okay? Hey, Dad, Ethan said, a rare softness in his tone. Got a minute? For you, always. His father chuckled. Why? Ethan looked at the photo again, the serene face of Riley Morgan. Do you remember when you told me business isn't just about profit? It's about the people you build it with. His father chuckled again. That sounds like me. Why? I think I met one of those people in the rain today, Ethan said, his gaze still fixed on Riley's photo, holding a sandwich. There was silence on the line, then the gentle hum of curiosity. "Tell me," his father urged. Ethan did. Not every detail, but enough. The fall, the indifference of the crowd, Riley's selfless act, her quiet dignity in the interview, the weight of her past, the injustice of it all. When he finished, his father said quietly, "Sounds like it's time to see what kind of leader you really want to be, son." Ethan nodded, a profound realization settling over him. "Yeah, I think it is." The next morning, a meeting request was sent to the entire hiring committee. Mandatory presence required. CEO attendance. The room filled slowly, more murmuring than usual, a subtle current of unease rippling through the polished executives. The atmosphere in the conference room was uncertain, as if the air itself had paused to listen. The hiring committee sat around the polished mahogany table, resumes and background checks laid out in neat stacks. But none of the papers felt neat anymore, not after Riley. Barrett from legal cleared his throat, flipping Riley's file closed with a quiet snap. Her answers were strong, no doubt, but the conviction, we just can't ignore that. Monica from HR looked conflicted, her brow furrowed. And yet, she owned every part of it. Didn't deflect. Didn't excuse. That means something. No, sir. We're wrong. But does it mean enough? Davis murmured, rubbing the back of his neck. This is Vale Corp. We cannot afford to risk reputation over compassion. Now, Bean. It was then that the door opened. All heads turned. Ethan Vale stepped in, his presence filling the room without a word. He wore no jacket, his sleeves rolled casually, but his gaze was focused, sharp, commanding. In his hand was something small, worn, slightly damp at the edges. He walked slowly to the center of the table and placed it down. A flattened, empty sandwich box, the deli label faint but visible. No one spoke. Ethan looked up, his eyes sweeping across the stunned faces of his committee. His voice, when it came, was quiet, but it carried, imbued with an unwavering conviction. "Before you make any decision," he said, "let me tell you who Riley Morgan really is." The tension in the room shifted like a curtain lifting, revealing a hidden stage. 3 days ago, Ethan began, his voice steady, I slipped and fell outside a corner store. Hard. My lunch was ruined. People passed. No one stopped. No one even looked. He tapped the sandwich box gently with his finger. Except one person. She didn't rush. She came out of nowhere. She helped me up without asking my name. She saw I'd lost my food. So she walked into that store, spent her last few dollars, yes, I checked, and came back with this sandwich and a bottle of water. She handed them to me like it was the most natural thing in the world. Boy. Barrett shifted, a flicker of disbelief in his eyes. You're saying that was her? Ethan nodded. She didn't know I was CEO. She didn't even recognize me. She just saw someone who needed help, and she acted. Monica's eyes widened. Davis blinked, a slow dawning of understanding on his face. Ethan continued, his voice firmer now, each word landing with impact. When I asked her why she did it, she said, I've been the one lying on the ground. I know how it feels. The words echoed for a moment, hanging in the stillness, a stark, visceral truth. She didn't try to sell me a story. She didn't ask for anything in return, and she didn't know that act would bring her here. But I did. And I watched her in that interview room. I watched her own her past and carry it with dignity. Barrett interjected, cautious, attempting to regain control. But Ethan, what about public perception? Clients, investors? Ethan turned to him, his gaze unwavering. Perception is built on precedent, Barrett. We set it. We define it. We can be a company that shuts out people with scars, or we can be one that recognizes healing takes courage. He walked to the head of the table and folded his arms, his stance radiating quiet authority. As of today, I'm launching the Second Chance Initiative, a hiring policy designed to evaluate people based not only on their past, but on what they've done to rise from it. He looked around the table, letting his words land, the weight of his conviction palpable. Riley Morgan is the first, but she will not be the last. Nilmage. Davis let out a low breath, a sound of dawning comprehension. You're serious? Ethan offered a thin, resolute smile. Dead serious? If we can build rockets that land themselves, we can build a company culture that knows how to forgive. He turned towards the door, then paused, his hand on the knob. She starts Monday, he said, his voice a quiet command. Make sure she has a desk and a chance. And with that, he walked out, leaving behind the empty sandwich box. But to those still sitting in the room, it felt like he had left something far heavier, a mirror and a choice. On her first day at Vale Corp, Riley stood alone in the elevator, her newly issued badge clipped neatly to her jacket. A crisp, new notebook tucked under one arm. The elevator dinged softly at each floor, carrying her higher into the corporate edifice. She could feel her nerves curling like smoke under her skin, a familiar anxiety that had clung to her for years. When the doors opened on her floor, a handful of employees glanced up. Some offered brief, polite nods, others barely looked up from their screens. A few whispered as she passed, the hushed tones carrying just enough to prick at her awareness. By lunchtime, the tension was clear. Whispers at the coffee station. The unspoken distance during team stand-ups. She wasn't just the new hire. She was the one with the story. Some looked at her with curiosity, others with discomfort, a few with outright judgment. She kept her head down, did her work, said thank you more than necessary, laughed only when it felt safe. That afternoon, a small package arrived at her desk. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its pages thick and inviting. On the cover, embossed in subtle silver, were the words, "From fall to flight." No sender name, but a note was tucked inside, written in a bold, confident hand. Every comeback begins with one person who keeps walking. Welcome to your flight. Riley smiled, biting her lip, a warmth spreading through her chest. She opened to the first page. It was blank, an invitation to begin again. A few days later, she was invited quietly to a lunch session hosted by the company's newly launched mentorship program. She almost didn't go, the fear of judgment still a heavy weight, but something in her pushed her feet towards the conference room. To her surprise, the room was bright and casual, filled with the hum of genuine conversation. A few senior employees, some newer hires, and Ethan, standing at the back, unobtrusive, not speaking, just watching. Someone handed Riley a sandwich and gestured to an empty seat. By the end of the session, she had 3 names to contact for help, 1 offer for a coffee chat, and a sticky note that simply said, "Glad you're here." A week after that, Riley received an unexpected email from Monica, one of Vale Corp's senior HR leads, and someone who had become a quiet champion of hers since her first day. The subject line read, "Internal Culture Session. We'd love for you to speak." Riley read the invitation twice. A workshop on resilience and company culture. Her name listed as the keynote speaker. She sat with it for a while, her fingers hovering over the keyboard to type a polite decline. She had never spoken in front of a large group before, and certainly not about something so personal, so raw. But before she could hit send, Ethan stopped by her desk. "You're doing good work, Riley," he said simply, his voice low but kind, his eyes holding a quiet encouragement. Then he handed her something small, a folded page from the notebook he had given her months ago. Inside it read, in that same bold hand, "Your voice is already louder than your past. Use it." That night, Riley typed, "Yes." The day of the event, the conference room filled quickly. Employees came early to find a seat, some standing along the walls by the time it began. It wasn't mandatory. It wasn't formal. It was just something people felt they needed to hear. Riley stood alone at the front. No podium, no slides, just a blank screen behind her, and her hands clasped in front of her. She didn't bring notes. She didn't quote statistics or give a rehearsed speech. She told the truth. "There was a time, not long ago," she began, her voice clear and steady, "when the only label people saw on me was ex-convict. No one asked why, or how, or who I was before, or after. The room stilled, a collective intake of breath. I applied to dozens of jobs, she continued, her gaze sweeping over the rapt faces. Got ignored by most, dismissed by the rest. And then, someone saw me. She paused, letting her gaze drift slowly across the room until it settled on Ethan, standing at the back, arms folded, watching quietly, a faint, almost imperceptible smile on his lips. She gave a soft, genuine smile in return. I'm not here because someone saved me, she said, her voice gaining strength, filling the room. I'm here because someone saw me and believed that people are more than their worst chapters. There was no applause yet, just a shared silence, profound and empathetic, that said everyone in the room understood something deeper than before. She smiled again, softer this time. This company gave me a chance. But more importantly, it gave me a mirror. One that didn't reflect failure, but flight. The first clap came from a young intern in the front row, tentative at first. Then a few more. Then, the entire room was applauding, not out of politeness, but in recognition, a wave of genuine appreciation washing over her. Afterward, people lined up to shake her hand, to share their own stories, to whisper, "Thank you." A few had tears in their eyes. Many simply nodded, their eyes meeting hers as if to say, "I see you." And somewhere behind the crowd Ethan watched. He didn't need to step forward. He didn't need credit. He had already done the most powerful thing he could do. He had given her the floor. And now Riley stood on it completely, firmly, and beautifully, on her own. The office was nearly silent, save for the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional sigh of wind brushing past the tall windows. It was nearly 11 p.m., and the city outside Vale Corp's glass facade had quieted into night. Inside, one light still burned softly. Riley's. She sat alone at her desk, papers spread out before her like a battle plan. Graphs, notes, rehearsal scripts. Tomorrow morning, she would present to a cross-department panel, pitching a proposal she had helped design from scratch. It was her first chance to prove herself not just as a symbol, but as a strategist, capable, prepared, essential. But her eyes were heavy now. She rubbed her temples, blinked, tried to focus. 5 more minutes, she whispered, setting her pen down and leaning her head on her folded arms. Just 5? She never felt herself slip into sleep. Ethan had returned to the office for a forgotten tablet. His evening had run late. Investor calls, documents to sign, the relentless demands of leadership. As he stepped onto the dimly lit work floor, he noticed a single glow from across the room. Curious, he walked quietly toward it and stopped. There, at her desk, was Riley, her head resting against a stack of notes, breathing soft, her body curled slightly under the fluorescent hush. Her brow still held a faint crease, as if she had fallen asleep mid-thought. He hesitated. Then gently he slipped off his own tailored coat and draped it over her shoulders. The fine fabric brushed her skin softly, and she stirred but did not wake. He looked around, then stepped into the break room. A few minutes later he returned with a paper cup. Chamomile tea. Still warm. He set it down beside her with quiet care, then sat in the chair across from her. In that moment, watching her sleep, calm, unguarded, he felt something unfamiliar, something that transcended admiration or pity. It was trust, a deep, quiet recognition, as if something in her silence spoke to a part of him he had not heard in years. She shifted again, and slowly her eyes blinked open. For a moment, she was confused, disoriented by the unexpected darkness and the warmth on her shoulders. Then she saw the jacket and the tea beside her. She sat up quickly, her cheeks flushing. "Oh my God. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to." Ethan lifted a hand, a gentle gesture of reassurance. "It's all right. I didn't want to wake you. You looked like you needed it." "No, I'm shy." She brushed a hand through her tousled hair, embarrassed. "I was just reviewing for tomorrow." "You've earned a rest," he said, smiling gently. "Come on, I'll drive you home." The car rolled through quiet city streets, jazz humming low from the stereo. A soft cinnamon cedar scent drifted from a diffuser clipped to the vento. Riley sat with her hands in her lap, fighting the heavy weight behind her eyes. "You can rest," Ethan said, his eyes on the road. "We've got a while." "I'm fine," she replied softly, but 5 minutes later her head dipped against the seat. Sleep claimed her without a fight. Ethan glanced over. The streetlights glowed across her face in soft gold. A single strand of hair had fallen across her cheek, fluttering slightly with each quiet breath. His hand moved almost on its own, lifted gently, hesitating near her face. He didn't know why he did it, only that something in him longed to smooth that hair away. Not for appearance, not for comfort, but because somehow she had become someone he didn't want the world to bruise again. Just as his fingers neared her cheek, her eyes blinked open. They both froze. Riley sat up slowly, a flush rising on her skin. Ethan withdrew his hand, eyes forward again. "Sorry," he said, clearing his throat, the sudden awkwardness thick in the air. "Your hair just got in your face." She looked at him, cheeks slightly pink, a tiny, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. "Oh, right." She turned to face the window, but neither spoke again, and neither could quite ignore the thrum in their chests, a silent current of awareness passing between them. When they reached her building, Ethan stepped out and opened her door. Riley stepped out slowly, the cool night air a welcome balm against her skin. She turned back to him, hesitating. "Thanks," she said, her voice soft. "For tonight. The tea, the coat, and everything." He smiled, his voice quiet. "You'd do the same." She nodded, then slipped inside. As the door closed behind her, Ethan stood on the sidewalk a moment longer, staring after the light behind her apartment window. And in that still night, neither of them slept. 1 year later, Vale Corp looked different. Not just in policy or performance, but in spirit. The walls felt warmer, the voices in the halls more sincere, and at the center of it all stood a woman once dismissed by the world, now standing in front of a national conference banner that read, "Faces of Cultural Transformation, Building Companies that Forgive and Flourish." Riley's photo was on every press handout. Her name trended on professional forums. Articles called her the symbol of second chances. But for her, it was never about being the symbol. It was about being seen. She stood backstage, her hands clasped lightly in front of her, heart beating fast as the host read her name. And now, please welcome the woman whose courage inspired one of the most progressive hiring movements in our industry, Riley Morgan. Applause thundered. Cameras flashed. Riley stepped onto the stage with quiet grace, her blonde hair catching the soft light like gold thread. She didn't read a script. She never did. "I used to think," she began, her voice resonating with a newfound confidence, "that redemption had to be earned through perfection, that you had to do something extraordinary to undo the worst chapter of your life. But I was wrong." She scanned the crowd, her gaze gentle, encompassing. "You don't need to be perfect. You just need someone to believe the best parts of you still exist and are worth the risk." She paused, then smiled softly. "For me, that someone wore a wrinkled shirt, held an empty lunchbox, and decided a stranger's kindness was more valuable than a clean record." A few people laughed gently, some wiped at their eyes. "I didn't have a polished resume or a polished past, but I had a heart that wanted to try again. That and a sandwich," she grinned, and the room broke into warm laughter and thunderous applause. Afterward, as the crowd slowly dispersed, Riley walked outside through the side entrance of the auditorium. The sky had turned a soft shade of peach, streaked with fading sunlight. Ethan was waiting under a tree. He had skipped the spotlight as he always did, but he had been there all along, watching from the back row. He stepped forward now, hands in his pockets, his eyes searching hers, a quiet intensity in their depths. "You were incredible," he said simply. Riley shrugged, half smiling. "I said what was true." They stood there for a moment, the soft breeze brushing past them, the sounds of the city fading into a gentle hum. Ethan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small, folded paper, familiar. Riley recognized it instantly. It was the note he had left in the journal a year ago. Every comeback begins with one person who keeps walking. She touched it gently, moved beyond words. "I've watched you," Ethan said, his voice low, a raw sincerity in his tone. "Not just succeed, but lift others with you. Change lives, mine included." "Wow." Riley blinked, caught off guard by the depth of emotion in his voice. "I never told you," Ethan continued, his gaze steady on hers, "but before that day, I was close to walking away from all of it. From this job, from this company. I'd lost faith in the people I was supposed to lead. And then you helped me when you didn't have to." No, sorry. She smiled through unshed tears, a single tear finally tracing a path down her cheek. "I didn't have anything that day," she said quietly. "Just a sandwich." Ethan stepped closer, his hand reaching for hers. "But I guess," she added with a soft laugh, the sound breaking through the quiet intensity, "it was enough." He smiled, a genuine, open smile that reached his eyes. Then, with no grand gestures, no dramatic pauses, just a voice filled with certainty, he said, "I've waited to say this for a long time, Riley. I'm in love with you." "There, monsieur." Her breath caught, and for a moment, all the noise, the doubts, the memories of prison bars and cold stares faded. She nodded slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Me too." They stepped away from the building, hand in hand, walking into the open air, the last rays of sun painting the sky in hues of orange and rose. No audience, no cameras, just two people finally aligned. As they reached the edge of the parking lot, Riley looked up. The fading sunlight filtered through her hair, catching gold at the edges. Beside her, Ethan smiled. Not because of the light, but because he knew that woman had once given him lunch. And now, she had given him a reason to believe again.